Hey guys, how y'all doing? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank y'all for joining me today. This is episode 161 of Hockey on the Spot. And for today's episode, we're going to continue with our 30 teams in 30 days, or NHL.com's 30 teams in 30 days. And we are almost done. We got 2 teams left to go, both of them residing in the state of California. We already did one of the 3 California teams yesterday in the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Los Angeles Kings. For today's team, for our second California team and second to last team overall, we're going to talk about the San Jose Sharks. And for the San Jose Sharks, it was really a nothing new season for the San Jose Sharks is really the best way to put it. A nothing new season in the sense that it was a fantastic regular season once again, and they disappointed in the playoffs. That is just absolutely nothing new for the Sharks anymore. Last season, though, as far as the regular season goes, it was kind of, in a way, it was almost a repeat of the lockout Jordan year, in which they got off to a great start. They were the best team at the start, and then they struggled for a little while. But during the beginning of that year, they had Thomas Hertl playing as a 19-year-old, and he was fantastic, as evidenced by his 4-goal performance in a 9-2 victory over the New York Rangers early in the season. He's already developed a nickname for himself, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Hertl. And he looked like he was going to be basically the Calder Trophy winner for Rookie of the Year early on. And honestly, he probably would have been had he been healthy all year. But unfortunately for the Sharks, he suffered an injury, a bad injury that kept him out until the final 2 games of the regular season. But he was healthy for their entire first-round playoff series. And that basically destroyed his chances of winning the Calder Trophy. But when he was healthy, he was the leading Calder Trophy candidate, and as I said before, he probably would have won it over Nathan MacKinnon had he stayed healthy. But unfortunately, he didn't. He got hurt on December 19th on the road against the Los Angeles Kings. He collided with LA's captain, Dustin Brown, and that kept him out for all but the remaining 2 games of the regular season. He came back April 11th against the Colorado Avalanche at home. But he did play their entire first-round playoff series. And the good news for the Sharks is that Thomas Hertl is healthy now, and he will be back for this season. As far as the other individual players go, from last year, they had a great year They witnessed a great year from Joe Pavelski, a very good year by both their veterans, Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau, very good years. And for Logan Couture, it was a good year for him, but not his most consistent year. He did reach the 20-goal mark once again. He finished with 23 goals, but he had 54 points because he missed some time during the season. But Joe Pavelski, for him, it was a career year last year. He played all 82 games and had 41 goals, 38 assists, and 79 points. He led the team in goals and points, all career highs. Both career highs. A team leading and career high plus 23, 32 penalty minutes, and 225 shots on goal. He was brilliant. He also represented the United States during the Olympics this past year and was one of their better players. He only had 1 goal, but he had 4 assists in 6 games, so he had 5 points. In the playoffs, he was one of their better offensive players as well. Through 7 games, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points, and 27 shots on goal while only taking 1 penalty the whole entire series. The only downside is that he was a -3 during the postseason, but that could be erased by his great offensive performance. So Joe Pavelski really was the star of the team last year. Logan Couture, as I said before, he missed a lot of time last year. He only played 65 games, which is most of the season, but he missed a good chunk of the season. He missed 17 games, but he still managed 23 goals, 31 assists, and 54 points, and he was a plus 21 with only 20 penalty minutes and 233 shots on goal. In the playoffs, though, he struggled. In 7 games, only a goal and 2 assists, 3 points, an even plus-minus rating, 7 penalty minutes, and 18 shots on goal. So he kind of struggled a little bit during the playoffs. So he was rather inconsistent last year. He'll look to be healthy this year and have a better year. And then, of course, their captain from last year, Joe Thornton, he was second on their team in points, with 76. But 65 of those points were assists. He only had 11 goals in 82 games, but he was a plus 20. He did generate 122 shots on goal, and he only had 32 penalty minutes. But like Logan Couture, he struggled in the playoffs. 2 goals and 1 assist and 3 points for 7 games. And he was a -6 with 8 penalty minutes and 16 shots on goal. So for Joe Thornton, this is a guy who is getting on in his years, and though he was, he's not the same goal scorer that he was, he's definitely not the skater he used to be. Never was the best skater in the game anyway, but he's now even slower than he was in years past. He's now 35 years of age. He's officially out of the prime of his career here. And he's not the dynamic player that he used to be. He can still be a good scorer and a good playmaker, but he's not as dynamic as he used to be. And the same could be said for Patrick Marleau. Unlike Joe Thornton, he can still skate, but he is 34 years of age. He'll be 35 on September 15th. He's exiting his prime years. Last year, though, he did play well last year through an 82-game season. 33 goals, 37 assists, and 70 points, an even plus-minus rating, 18 penalty minutes, and 285 shots on goal. And he was their best player in the playoffs. He was a point-a-game player in the playoffs. 7 points in 7 games, 3 goals, 4 assists, also even in plus-minus. Only 1 penalty taken throughout that whole series, and 25 shots on goal. So Patrick Marleau, he had a good year. But again, he's getting to his old age now. He's 35. He'll be 35 on September 15th. So his numbers may not be the same going into this year. But those 4 players, Logan Couture, Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, and Joe Pavelski, were pretty much their big scorers last year. Thomas Hertl obviously would have been one of their big scorers had he been healthy all year. Tommy Wingels had himself a nice year. It was a career year for him. And then Brent Burns was another 20-goal scorer last year. Through 69 games played, 22 goals, 26 assists, and 48 points. The 22 goals and 48 points are both career highs. He was a plus 26, which is a career high. Only 34 penalty minutes and 245 shots on goal, which is a career high. Through 7 games played, though, in the playoffs, he did struggle. 2 goals and an assist, 3 points, -5 rating, 23 penalty minutes, and 33 shots on goal. So those were really the best players for the Sharks last year. Those were the guys who did all the scoring. Marc-Edouard Vlasic was their best defenseman last year. And actually, he led the team in plus-minus. Joe Pavelski just led their forwards. Marc-Edouard Vlasic has now officially made a name for himself. He's now in the prime of his career, 27 years of age. After the way he played for Team Canada in the Olympics last year, he is no longer an underrated defenseman. He is now one of the top defensemen in the league. He's not a pure offensive defenseman, but not a pure defensive defenseman either. He's a two-way defenseman. He played 81 games last year, 5 goals, 19 assists, and 24 points, and a career high plus 31, 38 penalty minutes, and a career high 138 shots on goal, and in the playoffs, he missed 2 games, unfortunately, but through the 5 games he played, a goal and 2 assists, 3 points, an even plus-minus rating, and 10 shots on goal. So, and for Team Canada at the Olympics, he didn't have any points through 6 games, but he was a +3 and generated 8 shots on goal. He was their best defensive defenseman in that tournament. So, Marc-Edouard Vlasic now officially considered one of the top defensemen in the league. So the Sharks should be very happy to have him on the team right now. But enough about the individual efforts from players from last year. Last year, though, as I said during the regular season, it was a pretty decent year for the Sharks. I mean, it was a really good year, actually. Last year, 6th in the league with a 2.92 goals for percentage, actually tied with the St. Louis Blues, but they are considerably ahead of the Blues in that category. Goals against last year, they were even better, 5th in the league in their goals against average per game at 2.35%. So they were really good in that department. And for as far as penalties were concerned, they were one of the least penalized teams in the league. They were 5th in the league. They took the 5th least amount of penalties at an exact 9%. So they were very good in that regard. And their penalty killing was great as well. 6th in the league on the penalty kill at an 84.9 percentage, while finishing with a 6th in the league with a +29 rating for the season. So it was overall a very good season for the Sharks. And, oh yes, they were tied with the Washington Capitals for the most wins in the shootouts with 10. But they were considerably better than the But even though the Capitals are listed as first, I would say that the Sharks are probably could have been listed as better than the Capitals. I'd say the Sharks were better than the Capitals because the Capitals had 11 shootout losses while the Sharks only had 7. So I think the Sharks were better, but the Capitals are listed higher because they had more shootout goals. The only downside about the Sharks team from last year, and actually it was a big surprise for them, and with the amount of talent that they have, was how bad their power play was last year. Their power play was 20th in the league last year, tied for 19th with the Montreal Canadiens at 17.2%, but Montreal's is considerably higher. They had the best power play among the California teams, but their power play was not good at all. And they technically had the second best power play among teams in the Pacific Division, but that's not saying a lot because in the Pacific Division, only the Phoenix Coyotes, now the Arizona Coyotes, had a good power play. Their power play was 4th in the league. As far as the Pacific Division was concerned, bad year for the power play. San Jose Sharks 20th, Edmonton Oilers 21st, Anaheim Ducks 22nd, the Calgary Flames 24th, the Vancouver Canucks 26th, and the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Los Angeles Kings, they were 27th. The Coyotes were 4th. So it tells you that the power plays in the Pacific Division were not good, other than the Coyotes, and the Sharks were no different. And you think about all that talent that they do possess. Their power play was so bad last year. Their success came through even strength play, and great penalty killing. Overall, their record at the end of the year: 51, 22, and 9, which was good enough for 111 points. Second in the Pacific Division and 4th in the Western Conference. However, at one point of the season, even though it was for a very short time, they actually led the Pacific Division at one point because the Anaheim Ducks went through a struggling phase at one point in the season, and the two teams played each other in a game in San Jose, and the Sharks went on to win that game at home. And they temporarily stole the Pacific Division from the Anaheim Ducks after the Ducks had such a major point lead after the Ducks had such a major point lead over the Sharks and all the other teams for the Pacific Division. Ultimately, the Ducks would take it back, and they actually would clinch the Pacific Division title against the San Jose Sharks at the Honda Center. The Sharks would settle for second in the Pacific Division, which meant that they would go up against the Los Angeles Kings in the first round. The loser would play the Los Angeles Kings in round one. And the Sharks were the unfortunate souls that would play the eventual Stanley Cup champions in the first round. But it didn't seem to start out that way. The Sharks did have home ice advantage, and they took an early advantage in that series. They went on to take a 3-0 series lead. They were one win away from knocking out the Los Angeles Kings. However, bad offense and defense and inconsistent goaltending from Antti Niemi led to the Sharks' downfall. The Kings won Game 4 at home in overtime and then dominated the rest of the way. Jonathan Quick stole Game 5 at the tank, and then Games 6 and 7 were no contest. The Kings won by a mile. In Games 4 and 5, for those two games straight, Antti Niemi was actually pulled for Alex Stalock in both games, and Alex Stalock got the start in Game 6. Game number 7, Niemi goes back into the net, and the Sharks actually get the first goal of the game in front of their home crowd, but the Kings dominated from there, and ultimately the LA Kings would go on to erase a 3-0 series deficit and come back to defeat the San Jose Sharks in 7 games, and then they went all the way. They would eventually go on to win the Stanley Cup. So, a nightmarish kind of scenario for the San Jose Sharks. Last year, as far as the goaltending went, Antti Niemi had a great start to the regular season. He looked like he was picking up where he left off from his lockout-shortened year, which, by all due respect, was probably his best season in a San Jose Sharks uniform. He was a Vezina Trophy finalist that year. I mean, the one thing that Antti Niemi did do this past season was set a career high for most wins in a year. And for most wins in a year, he played 64 games and had a career high 39 wins. But again, he only had 17 losses, 7 overtime losses, and 4 shutouts. But and a .239 goals against average and .913 save percentage. But anyone will tell you that the record doesn't define, that great record doesn't really define how his season went overall. He was very inconsistent during the year. There were many game scenarios where he gave up 4 or more goals. He went through a 5-game losing streak where 4 of those games went into overtime. He gave up 4 goals in 4 of those games. He had a lot of games where he gave up 4 or more goals. So, Antti Niemi, again, was great at the beginning of the year. But once the first loss came around, he really struggled after that. Again, he finished with a career-high 39 wins, but his record didn't show how inconsistently he really played. Because then in the playoffs, he played in 6 of those games. He played in 6 games during the playoffs. Again, he did not play in Game 6. 3 wins, 3 losses, 374 goals against average, and 884 save percentage, which is just horrendous to look at for a goaltender in the playoffs. And Alex Stalock, let's look at his regular season and postseason by comparison. He played 24 regular season games and finished 12-5-2 with 2 shutouts, a 187 goals against average, and 932 save percentage. So he was actually pretty good. And in the playoffs, he played 3 games. Only one of those games was a start, 1 loss, and he let up 4 goals in that loss. A 205 goals against and 929 save percentage. So, it was not a good scenario for Alex Stalock to be in. And actually, now that I think about it, Game 4 in LA was not an overtime game. I made a mistake there. His best performance in the playoffs came in Game 5. He came into the net early in the game, and he faced 22 shots and made all 22 saves, even though the Sharks did go on to lose that game. But now you look at the San Jose Sharks after that, and now you really have to ask yourself, has their window of opportunity to win the Stanley Cup officially closed for now? That is a big question going into this offseason for the Sharks. Going down, having a 3-0 series lead, and then blowing it and allowing the other team to come back and win in 7 games is never a good thing. It's only the 4th time it's ever happened in the NHL, and it's only the 5th time it's ever happened in sports in general. So out of 5 times in all sports, 4 of them have happened in hockey. Remembering a Stanley Cup Final Series back in the 1930s, where the Toronto Maple Leafs came back from a 3-0 series deficit against the Detroit Red Wings to win the Cup in 7 games. In the 1970s, the Pittsburgh Penguins held a 3-0 series lead over the New York Islanders, and the Islanders came back to win that series. More recently, 2010, the last time it happened up until this season, the Boston Bruins held a 3-0 series lead over the Philadelphia Flyers, and the Flyers came back to win in 7 games, and they went on to go all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals and lose in 6 games to the Chicago Blackhawks. And then obviously this year, with the San Jose Sharks holding a 3-0 series lead over the Los Angeles Kings, and the Kings coming back to win the series in 7, and then eventually going all the way to win the Stanley Cup. Outside of hockey, the only time it's happened in Major League Baseball, 2004 Eastern Conference Finals, the end of the Curse of the Bambino, where the New York Yankees held a 3-0 series lead over the Boston Red Sox, and the Red Sox came back to win that series in 7 games. And, of course, the Red Sox also would go on to win the World Series. But that's off topic. Let's get back to hockey now. But whenever that happens to a team, you then go and look at yourself and ask why and how. The Sharks, the entire offseason was revolved around asking why and how. It was a miserable time for the Sharks, and I'm sure to this day, General Manager Doug Wilson, Head Coach Todd McClellan, and the rest of the Sharks staff and players are still feeling the sting of that defeat to this very day. So, when things like that happen, changes are made. And Doug Wilson, in a way, is pretty much made a statement that this year was going to be the beginning of a rebuild phase for the Sharks, and not a natural rebuild like what the Buffalo Sabres or the Calgary Flames or the Florida Panthers are going through, but a rebuild in a sense where they were going to let go of some veteran players who were really just either A, holding them back, or B, too old, and they wanted to get a younger group. They were going to let go of some of those veteran players, and that they weren't going to sign over much, and they were just going to let kids develop through the system. And it really was pretty much announced at the draft that no position in the roster is safe. The only players that will probably be safe really will be a player like Logan Couture and a player like Joe Pavelski and Thomas Hertl. Those are probably safe bets for the lineup. but everyone else is not safe, which means Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau's position on the team could be in jeopardy. They could eventually be traded if the Sharks are not progressing this coming season. And obviously it all started at the draft. The Sharks had the 27th overall pick, and they selected Russian forward Nikolai Goldobin from the Sarnia Sting. He is their top prospect forward, their number 3 prospect overall. He had through 67 games played for the Sarnia Sting of the Ontario Hockey League. He had 38 goals, 56 assists, and 94 points. So he's more of a playmaker. He led the team in goals, points, and points per game with a 140 percentage, and he was second with 10 power play goals. He's 6 foot, 185 pounds, and he projects to be a really good offensive player. He had at least a point in 22 consecutive games from November 14th of 2013 to January 11th, 2014, in which he had 21 goals and 43 points during the stretch. He needs to work on his game defensively, but he's going to come up and be a really good offensive player within the next couple of years for this team. But he is their top draft pick. Other than that, then it pretty much came down to free agency, and that's where the Sharks started to do some work. But prior to free agency, they made a minor trade. They made a trade with the New York Islanders, sending the rights to unrestricted free agent defenseman Dan Boyle to the Islanders in exchange for a draft pick. Dan Boyle ultimately would not sign with the New York Islanders. He opted not to sign with them, and he would ultimately go on to sign with their arch rivals, the New York Rangers. The Sharks also bought out the final year of Marty Havlat's contract via compliance buyout. Marty Havlat went on to sign a 1-year contract with the New Jersey Devils. He turned out to be a major disappointment in his 3 years in San Jose. And they also went on to trade defenseman Brad Stewart. They traded him, veteran defenseman Brad Stewart, to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for a couple of draft picks. They also have left winger Bracken Cairns and right winger Matt Pelech as unrestricted free agents. Neither of those two are going to be back for the Sharks this season, even though Bracken Cairns did play some big games for the Sharks last year. As far as additions go for the Sharks last year, again, not a very active offseason by any means. Most of the additions they made were pretty much additions for the Worcester Sharks of the American Hockey League. They added defenseman Taylor Doon. They added defenseman Taylor Fadoon. He's coming over from the Edmonton Oilers. He has NHL experience. He has 4 games of NHL experience from last year. He had 2 goals in those 4 games with a -1 rating and 6 shots on goal. So he's going to be a player who's going to look to maybe crack the lineup. He's 26 years of age, so he has another year to grow. He could make the team this year if they're extremely thin on the blue line. Most likely he'll begin the year in Worcester and then be called up if someone gets hurt. Because even though the Sharks do not have a very good blue line this year, they have players that are much better NHL players than Taylor Fadoon. And then last year also, though, in 65 games with the Oklahoma City Barons, he was very, very good. 10 goals, 28 assists, 38 points, a +6 rating, 51 penalty minutes, and 190 shots on goal. That came with the Barons. And through 3 playoff games with the Barons, 1 assist, -2, 4 penalty minutes, and 3 shots on goal. So this is a minor league player, but who could jump up to the NHL level at some point this season. And then other players they added, again, were 29-year-old left winger Brian Lerg, coming over from the Colorado Avalanche's affiliate, the Lake Erie Monsters. He probably is he's a stationary American Hockey League player. He could battle for a spot, but most likely will not. again, it's just another depth addition for the Miners. And then they added center Michael Haley coming over from the New York Rangers, American Hockey League affiliate, the Hartford Wolfpack. He's another player who will fight in camp to make a spot, but probably will not. And then they also made a trade with the Philadelphia Flyers, acquiring forward Ty McGinn from the Flyers in exchange for a draft pick. Ty McGinn is an interesting player to me. He was a fourth round, 119th overall pick by the Flyers in 2010. He's 24 years of age, but he has 36 games of NHL experience. He played two 18-game seasons. Both years he had 5 points. Last year was 4 goals, 1 assist, -1 rating, only 4 penalty minutes, and 16 shots on goal. He is the younger brother of former San Jose Sharks forward, currently a member of the Colorado Avalanche, Jamie McGinn. So this guy actually was a pretty good player, has been a pretty good player in his minor league career. A third line player, a future third line player. Again, he's never going to make it to a top 6 role, but he will probably eventually become a valuable third liner. A valuable third liner with some talent. So that arguably could be the Sharks' biggest addition this offseason, because he could be ready to make it to the team full time this year. But that's personally the player that I would consider the biggest addition for the Sharks. But the player that's realistically considered the biggest addition for the Sharks this offseason was an addition of a player that I think is just absolutely terrible. I personally don't know why the Sharks did this, but they added 6'8", 259-pound left winger John Scott coming over from the Buffalo Sabres. John Scott is a 6'8", 259-pound forward. All he is size, and that's it. He's 31 years of age. He'll be 32 on September 26th. He began his career as a defenseman. That didn't work out, and he moved to forward once he became a New York Ranger. But this player is quite arguably the worst player in the National Hockey League. He did have a goal last year through 56 games, his second of his career, but he was a -12 career low, 125 penalty minutes career high, and 16 shots on goal. He more likely than not won't make the top 12, but he is probably the 13th forward for the Sharks, and it's just one of those additions that you look at and shake your head and ask yourself, why did the Sharks make this move? Because John Scott, all he is a big forward. He can't skate, he can't shoot, and he can't hit properly. He can fight, I'll admit that, but that's all he can do. He just stand out there and fight. He just show off his size and fight. He's too slow to make good hits, and he is just not a good player. I do not like John Scott personally. He is one of those players that, in my personal opinion, does not belong in this league. And it just shows you that the Sharks. It just shows you how bad the Sharks' offseason has been. Because of that signing alone, they were actually considered one of the worst, if not the worst, team in this year's offseason. A lot of people consider them to be the biggest losers of the offseason this year, and I would agree with that. I mean, obviously, you have a team like the Los Angeles Kings, who only added Adam Cracknell and David Vander Gulik. But they don't need to add anybody. They're that good. You can look at the Boston Bruins. They couldn't add anybody because they're over the salary cap, and they also don't need to. Their roster is as good as it is. Obviously, they gave a pro tryout contract to Simon Gagne. That's their only move. But they don't need to make any moves. Them and the Kings are loaded with players. Maybe the Detroit Red Wings could arguably be in that category. of teams that fell out of the biggest losers of the offseason. It's definitely between the San Jose Sharks and the Detroit Red Wings. The Red Wings are most definitely the losers of the East. The Sharks are most definitely the losers of the West as far as offseason performance. Because when you hear the word rebuild, even though maybe when you hear the word rebuild, you expect offloading major players and getting a lot of youngsters and having a big offseason, bigger than what the Sharks had. They didn't. So, now one could say that this is similar to the 2003-2004 team when the only addition they made was Scott Parker, and they went all the way to the Western Conference Finals and lost to the Calgary Flames. Okay, fine. That's all great, good and dandy, but they had they had much more talented players back then than they do now, because their prospect pool, quite frankly, is just okay. It's not that great. And we'll talk more about that later, but I do not like the addition of John Scott, and if I'm a Sharks fan, I'm very disappointed with what Doug Wilson has done this offseason. But probably the most major move of all by Doug Wilson was making the announcement that the Sharks are going to enter the 2014 preseason with no captains and no alternate captains. It's pretty much official that Joe Thornton's captaincy has been taken away, and it will be decided in training camp by performance, sportsmanship, and leadership in the locker room, who is going to be the captain and the alternate captains. Now, and actually over the offseason, I will admit this, Doug Wilson was trying to move Joe Thornton over the offseason, but Joe Thornton was not willing to waive his no-trade clause, and they were also trying to move Patrick Marleau, though they were not as serious about moving Patrick Marleau as they were about moving Joe Thornton. But Patrick Marleau also has a no-trade clause, and he also was unwilling to waive it. So the Sharks, at least for right now, are stuck with those two players. As we now go and take a look at some of the big questions for the San Jose Sharks this offseason. And the biggest question of all, again, is who will be the captain. Patrick Marleau was a captain in the past, and Joe Thornton was the most recent captain. Rob Blake was the captain in between the two of them, but he, of course, is long retired. One would say that forward Joe Pavelski would probably be the most likely candidate to become the next team captain, but Logan Couture and Marc-Edouard Vlasic are also major candidates as well. We'll see, though. It's going to be a really interesting offseason, a really interesting training camp for the San Jose Sharks, and they will be one of the more interesting teams, maybe even the most interesting team to watch as far as training camp and preseason is concerned. Will there be a new number one goaltender? Antti Niemi, obviously we all know about Antti Niemi, and he has owned the starting job for the past 4 seasons, but he faces a huge challenge from backup Alex Stalock, who posted better numbers than Niemi in 2013-2014. Stalock went 12-5-2 with a 187 goals against average and 932 save percentage, while Niemi was 39-17-7 with a 239 goals against average and 913 save percentage. It was Antti Niemi's career year as far as wins in the season. He had 39 wins, which is the most he has ever had in a single season, but the 239 goals against and 913 save percentage are very concerning. Obviously, back in 2010, his first season in the NHL, he overtook Cristobal Huet as the starter for the Chicago Blackhawks and won the Stanley Cup in his first year. Stalock obviously made a strong impression last year and was rewarded with a 2-year contract, keeping him off the free agent market. And as for Antti Niemi, this is a big year for him because he is now in the final year of his contract. This is Antti Niemi's contract year. And Niemi, ever since when he was, and for Niemi, he is 31 years of age as of today, actually. So happy birthday to Antti Niemi. Go enjoy some cake and some beer. Although, hopefully, as another birthday present, you'll start playing better when the season comes around. But as I was saying, after Niemi won the cup with the Chicago Blackhawks, the Hawks did not have the cap room to re-sign him because of the contract they gave to Nicholas Chalmerson over that offseason. The Sharks pretty much faked out the Blackhawks and made it look like they were going to sign Nicholas Chalmerson. And the Hawks matched Chalmerson's contract as they had planned. Their real target was Antti Niemi, so they went after Antti Niemi as an RFA. The Hawks did not have the money to match their offer. He went on to sign what was originally a one-year, $3 million deal with the Sharks. Struggled when he first came to San Jose. And Antero Niittymaki was the starter at the beginning of that year. But then when Niittymaki got hurt, that's when Niemi finally turned it up. And he went on to have a good year and led the Sharks all the way to the Western Conference Finals for the second straight year, where they lost in 5 games to the Vancouver Canucks. The next few years, 2011-12 was a bad year for the Sharks in general. It was a major setback year. No one played well, not even Antti Niemi. The lockout-shortened year was probably Antti Niemi's best year as a Shark. You double the amount of games. You add in a full 82-game season, and the amount of wins he had that year is probably increased. He was a Vezina Trophy finalist. Ultimately, although Sergei Bobrovsky would win the honor. And then, of course, last year, career-high 39 wins, but a really terrible season and an even worse playoff. He had a great start, as I said, where he was on a massive win streak. He wasn't losing a game, and he wasn't letting in more than 2 goals. Once he got that first regulation loss, that's when things went downhill for him. So, we'll see what happens with Antti Niemi this year. We'll see what happens with their goaltending this year. Can Logan Couture bounce back after an injury-plagued season? As I said before, he was supposed to have a breakout season and make the Canadian team for the 2014 Sochi Olympics, but they were derailed by a hand injury that required surgery in early January. He did have good numbers ultimately for considering the amount of games he played, and he was a 20-goal scorer once again. He had 2 more goals than he had in the lockout-shortened year, but whenever you're coming off an injury-prone season, you have hopes that the player will come back and be more effective. Hopefully that can happen to Logan Couture. That's what the Sharks are hoping, and if that does happen to be the case, then the Sharks are going to be one of the top scoring teams in the league this year. Will Thomas Hertl build on his promising rookie season? That is a big question. That is the question of the day. When he came back, he came in and was really good in the playoffs. He was one of their better forwards in the playoffs. He looked like the same player we saw at the beginning of the year, where he had the makings of a Calder Trophy season. He was the 17th overall pick by the Sharks back in 2012. And last year highlighted one of the weakest top 10 prospect pools in the National Hockey League. He made the team last year, and again, as I said earlier, if Thomas Hertl had been healthy for the full 82-game season, he probably would have won the Calder Trophy over Nathan MacKinnon. So, I think Nathan MacKinnon, part of him winning the trophy, had to do with luck. On the part that Thomas Hertl got hurt. So, we'll see if Hertl can come back and be strong and not suffer from the sophomore jinx. They need him to not suffer from the sophomore jinx, because if he does, then the Sharks are going to be in for a major problem. And lastly, how will the Sharks rebound after their stunning first-round loss? Most likely they'll try to use that meltdown as motivation. However, you can only do so much with that, because drama has set in. In addition to taking that loss to heart, drama has set in this regular season, and drama has set in this regular season, and and it's really affected all the players, particularly the two veterans, Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau, and that could lead to a poor performance for the upcoming year, which actually takes me to my personal question for the San Jose Sharks. Will all this drama that has been going on bleed into the regular season, which is kind of a copy of the same question that Dan Rosen asked on NHL.com. Shout out to Dan Rosen, my good friend. But I'm also asking the very same question. And it's a tough thing to answer, really. It really all comes down to the training camps, to the preseason even, and to the beginning of the regular season. What the team will look like going into the beginning of the year could be the makeup of what their team will look like for the rest of the year. That's not always the case, but for the San Jose Sharks this year, because of all the drama that's happened, that could be the case for them this year. So, pretty much what I'm saying is, for the Sharks to have a good year, they're going to have to break out right at the start of the season. And they've done that the past 2 seasons. But, so, there's no doubt in my mind that it's possible for them to do it this year. As we now go and take a look at their projected lineup for the upcoming season. For the upcoming season, they have a very unique group of forwards, that's for sure. One thing that's for sure about the Sharks is that their top 6 is loaded. They're going to have one of the better top 6s going into the league for this coming year. They have Joe Thornton centering, Joe Pavelski on the right, and Thomas Hertl on the left as the projected top line. Joe Pavelski and Thomas Hertl are guys who can both play center as well, but Pavelski played right wing. Joe Pavelski split roles last year between third line center and top line right winger. And it's been shown that he's probably much better off as a winger, but at the same time, you got to look at it from a depth standpoint and what would be better for the Sharks team as a whole. Because then on the second line, you got Logan Couture centering Patrick Marleau on the right side, which is a little bit interesting, and Matt Nieto on the left side. Matt Nieto had a solid rookie season as well last year, and he could be ready to take a bigger role this year. Through 66 games, 10 goals, 14 assists, 24 points, a -4 rating, 16 penalty minutes, and 124 shots on goal. But where he really shined was the postseason. He was one of their better forwards. Through 7 games, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points, +3, 4, and 14 shots on goal without any penalty minutes. He's expected to take that postseason performance and carry that over into the beginning of this year's regular season. Again, the big question I have, though, is Patrick Marleau. He's played on the right wing side before in his career, but he's naturally a left winger. He's a left-handed shot, and he prefers to play the left wing. He could take the right wing spot for this coming year and play the off wing, which he has done before. He did it back when Danny Heatley was still on the team, and Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, and Danny Heatley came together to form the best line in the National Hockey League during the 2009-2010 season. So Patrick Marleau has done it before, but has been throughout his career much more comfortable on the left wing side. But after that top six, this is where things get a little stale for the Sharks forward core. The third line, I do not like this third line at all. They do have Tommy Wingels playing left wing on that line, and he has proven that he could play in this league. Last year was a great year for him through 77 games. He had 16 goals, 22 assists, 38 points, a plus 11 rating, only 35 penalty minutes, and 163 shots on goal. He looked like he was a really good player for them last year up until the playoffs. He really struggled in the playoffs. Through 7 games, he didn't have a goal, and he only had 3 assists. He was a -2, and he only had 13 shots on goal, though he did only have 4 penalty minutes. He did struggle in the playoffs. However, that doesn't change the fact that now Tommy Wingels is being looked upon as a key player for this organization. He's definitely a good addition for that bottom 6, but after that, the bottom 6 gets extremely stale because they have James Sheppard, who is projected to be the center on that line, although he's a much better winger, left winger, and Freddie Hamilton on the right side. He can play center or right wing, but he'll most likely play right wing because of how many centers the Sharks do have. I think Tommy Wingels should really be the center and James Sheppard should really be on the left wing side. That would be much better for the organization. James Sheppard, though, overall, has never lived up to his draft status. He does not live up to his draft status. He never did. He was a 9th overall pick by the Minnesota Wild in 2006. But for the Sharks last year, he came in and really played well for them defensively. Through 67 games, only 4 goals, 16 assists, and 20 points. But he was a +3. He was a plus player for the first time in his career. He only had 35 penalty minutes, and he generated 84 shots on goal. And then he actually, surprisingly enough, was one of their best players in the playoffs. Through 7 games, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points, a +3 rating, only 6 penalty minutes, and 10 shots on goal. He was fantastic during the playoffs. But as good as he was in that postseason, you gotta expect that it is James Sheppard, and you gotta expect that he will come back down to earth when the season begins. And then Freddie Hamilton, last season, he did get an 11-game stint with the Sharks last year, but he didn't have any points, and he was a -5 while only projecting 13 shots on goal and 1 penalty. So Freddie Hamilton he is 22 years old. He is the older brother of Boston Bruins first rounder Dougie Hamilton. And though his younger brother is going to be a better player, Freddie Hamilton will go on to prove himself as a good bottom pair player, and maybe even if he really pushes hard enough, become a second line center at some point. It's very possible. And then the fourth line, you got Andrew Desjardins centering Tyler Kennedy on the right and Mike Brown on the left. Tyler Kennedy fell out of favor last year as a regular in the lineup. He played 67 games during the regular season, but it was not a good year for him. 4 goals, 13 assists, 17 points, -10, 34 penalty minutes, and 143 shots on goal. He did not play a single playoff game for the Sharks last year, which, to be honest, I thought was kind of a mistake, because last year he was the only player on the team who had a Stanley Cup ring and had the experience of a Stanley Cup player, had experience in the Stanley Cup Finals. So I also think that not putting Tyler Kennedy in the lineup was a big reason why the Sharks fell through the way they did against the LA Kings in the first round. And then, of course, you got Mike Brown, who's really naturally a right winger, but will probably take a left wing role this year. And then, of course, you have Ty McGinn, who will come in as the 13th guy. He'll probably battle for a regular spot as well. And then John Scott as the 14th guy, which, again, I do not like John Scott at all. So he'll probably get some games this season, but it would not be a smart move by the Sharks, and it was still, to me, not a smart move to sign him. But one player that's also a roster player that they're expected to miss for pretty much maybe the whole season is Raffi Torres. Raffi Torres is going to miss a significant chunk of the season after having knee surgery. He set back over the offseason and had another knee surgery. So they're short a forward, which is why Freddie Hamilton will probably come up and be the 12th forward on the roster. They also have forwards Michael Haley and Travis Oleksiak, who could both come up and battle for spots on the team this year. So on their forward group, I'd say it's a good top six, but then a really weak bottom six outside of Tommy Wingels. So it's really interesting. I think there is a way for the Sharks. I personally think there is a way for the Sharks to make this better. They're going to need, my personal opinion, if I were the San Jose Sharks, I would put Joe Thornton. I would at some point in the season experiment the idea of maybe putting Joe Thornton on the third line and then moving Joe Pavelski to center on the top line and then keep Logan Couture where he is. If that's, of course, if they want to keep up with the center depth on the Los Angeles Kings. And hey, if maybe a guy like Thomas Hertl is going through a sophomore jinx, the one upside about that is they could put him on the fourth line and play center on the fourth line, because he could play center as well as wing. That would make the Sharks' center depth absolutely incredible, and all of a sudden, their center depth matches, if not betters, that of the Los Angeles Kings. That's how they're going to compete with the Los Angeles Kings, and that, I think, is what they need to do. At the very least, put Thornton on the third line and move Pavelski to center. What they do with their fourth line, as far as the center goes, is up to them, but for their top three, they need to have top six forwards on all angles. So, they're for their top 9 forwards. So, that is what I personally would do, and that's something that could be experimented at some point during the season, but we'll see. We'll see. It all depends on overall performance as well. Now we got the defense. I think like I said about the forward group, I think it's a decent forward group overall. Again, I think with how good the top 6 is, definitely outweighs how weak the bottom 6 is. And even despite how weak their bottom 6 is, they still have Tommy Wingels down there, and he had a breakout year last year. This, to me, is where the Sharks team starts to look a little bit on the ugly side. Their defense. I think this defense, it's not the worst defense in the league, but it's definitely not a great defense. Marc-Edouard Vlasic, there's no doubt, like I said before, he's proven himself to be a top defenseman in this league, and definitely a top 2 defenseman, and maybe even a top 2 defenseman. But if that's even the case, that's the only top 2 defenseman they have, because Dan Boyle is gone. He was their other top 2 guy, and Brad Stewart is gone. They've made room for youngsters to come up on the blue line, and that makes their blue line look like Marc-Edouard Vlasic and Jason Demers. Jason Demers, he's not even a top 4 guy. He's a top 6 guy, and he will probably play on that top D pairing with Marc-Edouard Vlasic. Although I will admit, Demers did have a good year last year. It was his best year. 5 goals, 29 assists, and 34 points, all career highs, plus 14, 30 penalty minutes, and 105 shots on goal. He struggled in the playoffs, however. Only 1 assist, -4, 12 penalty minutes, and 10 shots on goal. So, he struggled in the playoffs, but that doesn't change the fact that the Sharks are still high on him, but I think he's playing a role that he is not so good to be playing. Then on the second defense pair, Justin Braun and Brent Burns. And that was another, you heard it right, Brent Burns. One of the announcements that was made by Doug Wilson this season was that Brent Burns was going to move back to defense after playing the last year and a half at forward, which I personally think is a mistake. Brent Burns, when he was a defenseman when he first joined the Sharks in 2011-12. And even though he was a +8, how good he was plus-minus wise really doesn't show how bad he was playing the position that year and how out of place he looked at times. 11 goals, 26 assists, and 37 points would follow through 81 games, and he had 34 penalty minutes and 201 shots on goal. The lockout-shortened season comes around, starts the year on defense, and he's playing horrible. He moves to forward, playing on a line with Joe Thornton and TJ Gagliardi, who they had at the time, and that, at one point, was their best line. And so, it kind of stuck that Brent Burns would stay on a line with Joe Thornton last year, and he had a great year. Maybe not so great in the playoffs, but during the regular season, he was a 20-goal scorer. He had 22 goals, and he had 48 points, and he was a +26, which was a career high. So, it was a great year for Brent Burns, and now you're taking what could be a season that he could improve on, and now you're moving him back to defense, where he does play well offensively, and he has a big shot, but defensively, he's always out of place when playing on the blue line. So, I think it's a mistake to put him back there. Maybe the Sharks will realize that at some point, but at least to begin the year, he will be back on the blue line. Justin Braun could be his defense partner. He played all 82 games last year and had 4 goals, 13 assists, 17 points, +19, a career high. Actually, everything was a career high for Justin Braun last year. Only 20 penalty minutes and 121 shots on goal, career high. He's 27 years of age. He's officially in his prime. He's a right-handed shooter. And then in the playoffs, he was pretty good as well. Even though he only had a goal and an assist through 7 games, he was a +1, and he had 7 shots on goal, but he had 7 penalty minutes. So, for Justin Braun, it was a good year for him last year overall. So, I like Justin Braun playing that second D pair, but I don't like Brent Burns. The idea of moving him back to defense, period, is a bad idea. And then the third pair, Scott Hannon and Matt Irwin, with Matt Tennyson being the 7th guy. Scott Hannon could be ready for a more regular role this year. Now with Brad Stewart and Dan Boyle gone, he's going to play more of a regular role. With the opportunities he had last year, though, the 35-year-old defenseman who turns 36 on January 23rd was actually pretty solid. 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points, but he was a +1, 55 penalty minutes, and 52 shots on goal, and he was solid defensively in the playoffs with a +1 rating and 7 shots on goal. He only had 2 assists, but again, he's more of a shutdown defenseman. Matt Irwin was one of the big surprises last year when he came up from the minors. During the lockout shortened year, I should say. Last year, however, was kind of a setback year for Matt Irwin. 62 games played, 2 goals, 17 assists, 19 points, though he was a +5, 35 penalty minutes, and 147 shots on goal, and he only played 2 playoff games. He did have a goal, but he was a -1 with 4 shots on goal. Matt Irwin is a guy who, came up in the lockout shortened year and really played well. He has a huge shot from the point, big shot from the point, which is why he can quarterback a power play, but last year was kind of a setback year for him. So he'll look to have a much better year for this coming season. But I personally think that, honestly, Matt Irwin should be playing the second D pair, and a guy like Justin Braun should move down to even out the lefties and righties. Matt Tennyson is a guy who could come up and be the 7th guy. He did have He has 4 games of NHL experience, all in the lockout shortened year, and he played pretty well in those games. He had 2 assists, and he was a +2 with only 2 penalty minutes and 8 shots on goal. The undrafted Pleasanton, California native could prove that he is ready for a bigger role this season, but he is going to have to battle for that spot because they also have Mirko Mueller, who could be ready to play in the NHL this year, and Taylor Fadoon, who is also going to battle for a spot. And then in goal, this is where all the concerns come in as well. Antti Niemi is probably going to be the starter with Alex Stalock as the backup. However, it's going to be a battle. They're probably going to split the starting jobs at the beginning of the year, although it is projected that Antti Niemi will eventually regain the starting job. It wouldn't surprise me at all because I think, Antti Niemi has a lot of talent, very skilled, especially down low. It seems pretty mind-boggling to know that Antti Niemi is struggling. But anything could happen, and Stalock's really proving himself now. And it's weird because Alex Stalock really wasn't even that good at any junior or minor level. So for him to come up and be good now, it's very mind-boggling. But then beyond those two, their goaltending depth is really not that good. Troy Grosnick is pretty much the third goaltender, and he's never played in the NHL before. Their goaltending depth is not good. So overall, he's a 25-year-old. He just turned 25 from Brookfield, Wisconsin, and he's undrafted. He'll probably be the starter down in Worcester this year, but we'll see. But whether he comes up at some point or not remains to be seen. Again, the forward group is probably the biggest upside for this team. But on defense and in goal, there's a lot of concerns. Defense looks very inconsistent, and now, because of how inconsistent Antti Niemi was, their goaltending is no longer a solid goaltending duo. Now you kind of have to be concerned. Kind of the same situation with the Pittsburgh Penguins and Marc-Andre Fleury for this year. You cannot really trust. You can no longer trust him 100%. As we now go ahead and take a look at the Sharks' top 10 prospects. Honestly, for the San Jose Sharks, after looking at this prospect pool, it's really hard to determine, who has a weaker prospect pool between them and the Edmonton Oilers. I'm now actually going to the Oilers' top 10 prospects even as we speak, and really through full examination, after a full examination, when you look at the Sharks' top 10 prospects, Mirko Mueller, their first round number 18th overall pick from last year, is their top prospect. He's a Swiss native, and through 60 games last year, 5 goals, 22 assists, and 27 points for the Everett Silvertips of the Western Hockey League. He's probably not ready to play this year. He will battle for a spot, but he probably needs another year in juniors to improve on his offensive skills. He was very good defensively last year, but he has the potential to put up more offensive numbers as well. He's considerably a two-way defenseman, so he'll look to increase his offensive abilities. Taylor Doherty is number 2. He's a guy who could get an opportunity to play this year. He's going to battle for a spot this year. He's a guy who's been in long wait. He's a 6'8", 229-pound shutdown defenseman, and he's been waiting for a long time. So he could very well be ready. Nikolai Goldobin is number 3. He, again, was their 27th overall pick this past year. Gabriel Boudreau, number 4. Chris Tierney is number 5. He's a guy who's really coming up and really becoming a good player. Freddie Hamilton's number 6. He's ready to play this year, more likely than not. Matt Tennyson is number 7. Konrad Abeltschauser is number 8. He's a German defenseman. Dylan DeMello, number 9, and Julius Bergman, their second-round, 46th overall pick from this past year, is number 10. He has the makings to be a real good two-way defenseman one day. But, so overall, I'd probably have to say the Sharks, there's no doubt about it that the San Jose Sharks' top 10 prospects has definitely improved this year over what it was last year. Because last year, it was the worst prospect pool in the Pacific Division. This year, it's still not the strongest, and it's still actually one of the weakest. But at the very least, I'd say it's actually probably a little bit stronger than the Edmonton Oilers now. Even though the Oilers obviously have a highly touted prospect in Leon Draisaitl and a highly touted defenseman in Darnell Nurse, as well as Oscar Klefbom, their top 3 is very good, but beyond that, it just looks a little bit inconsistent. So I'd say the Sharks are just a little bit deeper than the Edmonton Oilers, but all the other teams we've done so far, the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, the Arizona Coyotes, and the Los Angeles Kings, they are all 10 times deeper than that of the San Jose Sharks as far as their prospects go. Now, of all these prospects in the Sharks system, the prospect that I find the most interesting of this top 10 group, and the one that highlights me, probably has to be, believe it or not, their number 5 prospect, center Chris Tierney. Why Chris Tierney? Well, he was their second-round, 55th overall pick from 2012, and he's really just gotten so much better over the years. Last year, 67 games played for the London Knights of the Ontario Hockey League, 40 goals, 49 assists, and 89 points. He's 6 foot, 181 pounds. He was also a plus 44 rating, which tells you how good of a player he is defensively as well. And he had 6 goals and 17 points in 9 OHL playoff games. He's now 20 years of age, and he'll begin his professional career in Worcester this season. He's probably going to need 1 year in the American Hockey League before he's ready to come up. But he's a pretty similar player to Logan Couture. He'll make the team quicker, and there's less risk in those types of players because you know they'll play somewhere. So he may not be as fast as Logan Couture, but he definitely has speed. He definitely has speed and quickness. He's got good hand. He's good on the puck, very versatile. He can play, in addition to a great offensive game, can also be great defensively and help kill penalties as well. He could eventually become a second-line center for the Sharks in the future. Maybe, even if he's lucky, a top-line center if he just gets better than anyone expects and Logan Couture goes downhill from here. You know, that is possible that it could happen. Anything could happen in this sport, but Chris Tierney, their number 5 prospect center, Chris Tierney, is my top prospect for the San Jose Sharks, and I think he has the making to be a real good player for this team one day. Now, the player on the San Jose Sharks who has to be better this year in order for the Sharks to get back to the playoffs and maybe finally end their playoff droughts and finally get to the Stanley Cup Finals. The San Jose Sharks are actually one of the harder teams to pick from because there are a lot of players you can choose from. Even though Logan Couture had 23 goals last year, he did suffer an injury last year and he struggled in the playoffs. So he is definitely an option. Thomas Hertl is an option, too, because of the fact that he was injury-prone. I mean, Tyler Kennedy is maybe the most likely option if you're going with a forward, just because he is the Stanley Cup veteran on this roster, and he didn't play a single playoff game last year. He played so bad last year after he was the Sharks' only acquisition last season. you could say Brent Burns just because of the fact that he moved back to defense. He had a good year last year, but he was playing forward. And you could also go with one of the goaltenders as well. I think for a situation like this, I'd probably have to say it's a really tough decision because I've really leaned a lot towards Tyler Kennedy because he's now officially going to be a regular again for the team, or at least that's the expectations. And if the Sharks are going to go far in the playoffs, they definitely need him to be the way he was when he was with the Pittsburgh Penguins, helping them through the Stanley Cup playoffs, being a good depth player for them, and scoring clutch goals in clutch situations. But I guess when I really, really look at it, I think the smart decision, realistically speaking, would have to be goaltender Antti Niemi. For this situation, you do look at their goaltending, and Antti Niemi is the guy. Why Antti Niemi? Well, we've talked about it all episode long, and I'll say it again. Last year, again, a career year for him as far as his record is concerned. 64 games played, 39 wins, which is a career high, 17 losses, and 7 overtime losses with 4 shutouts. However, he's had a .239 goals against average and .913 save percentage, which are really ugly numbers. In the playoffs, it was even worse. He played 6. He started in 6 of the 7 games, got pulled in 2 of those games, and ultimately went 3-3 with a .374 goals against average and .884 save percentage, no shutouts. Ugh. Really ugly numbers for Antti Niemi last year. And he's now officially 31 years of age, so he's still relatively young. He's still technically in his prime. But last year, as I said before, he began the year with 6 wins in a row, and in those 6 games, he didn't give up any more than 2 goals. He was spectacular in those first 6 games. His first loss came on October 17th against the Dallas Stars in overtime. He gave up 3 goals. He then came back to win the next game, though he did give up 3 goals, and then the next game after that was a shutout and a loss. After that, he only gave up 2 goals, even though it was a loss, and then the game after that, he came back with another shutout. But then this is where he really started to struggle. He started giving up 4 goals He then gave up 4 goals in 4 out of 5 games. And then he started giving up a lot of goals. This became a common thing for him to give up 4 goals a game, 5 goals a game. He just did not look fresh. He just did not look fresh for the rest of the year. His best performance of the season came on the road in a 1-0 victory against the New York Rangers at the Garden. It was a 41-save shutout for Antti Niemi. That was his best performance of the season. And that was the one game of the year where he looked like classic Antti Niemi. But after that, he was really bad. And in the playoffs, he gave up 3 or more goals in 5 out of the 6 games. Game number 5, he gave up 3 goals on 19 shots. He was just absolutely terrible in the playoffs. And that is why Antti Niemi is the player who needs to be better this year. They need to be able to trust Antti Niemi again. He is in his contract year. This is the final year of his contract, and his performance this year could determine his future as a San Jose Shark. They need him to be top-notch again. They need him to be solid again. They need him to be the same Antti Niemi he was back in the lockout-shortened year when he was a Vezina Trophy finalist. And if he can do better than that, be the Antti Niemi he was in the 2010 playoffs with the Chicago Blackhawks. The Antti Niemi that they bargained for when they signed him. Again, it was originally a 1-year deal at $3 million, but then they gave him a 4-year contract extension. He's in the final year of that contract extension. So in order for the San Jose Sharks to be better this year. You could look at Brent Burns going back to the blue line all you want, and then you could look at Thomas Hertl, Logan Couture, Tyler Kennedy. You could look at those guys all you want. Maybe even Alex Stalock to some extent. But again, he's a projected backup goaltender, and you really can't say a backup goaltender needs to be better. So ultimately, despite the 39 wins last year, which is great and all, Antti Niemi needs to be the player that needs to be better for this coming season. He needs to re-solidify his starting role as the Sharks goaltender. Because I personally would not trust Alex Stalock with my life. He's very unproven to me. Even though he did have better numbers than Niemi. But if Stalock ends up having to be the starter, then the Sharks are in for a big problem this season. But so Antti Niemi is the guy who needs to be better. Overall, are the San Jose Sharks a playoff team this year? It's actually very, very interesting to look at the San Jose Sharks this year. Because, honestly, it's really a tough decision. They definitely have the potential to make the playoffs again. They have the talent. They have the offense. They're expected to be one of the better offensive teams in the league once again. Joe Pavelski and Logan Couture and Thomas Hertl are expected to build off their years last year. Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau, they're probably expected to regress a little bit, but the other three guys are expected to make up for their regression. And despite that they will regress, Marleau and Thornton at the very least will probably be 60-point guys for the coming year at the very least. Joe Thornton threw assists and Patrick Marleau threw goals. He's still a solid 25-30 goal scorer. Joe Thornton, again, he's lost his goal-scoring knack. He's not a 20-goal guy anymore, but he still puts up a boatload of assists. But again, one thing that is true is that Joe Thornton is not the star of this team anymore, and he shouldn't be. His skating is nowhere near the same as it was. He's not a good skater anymore. And he's always just a lightning rod in the playoffs, you know? He's never good in the playoffs. He really never is. He was very good during the 2011 postseason. That was his best postseason. But every other postseason he's been a part of, he has just been a lightning rod for the team. He's just one of those players that's great during the regular season, bad in the playoffs. Again, the move of Brent Burns going back to defense is a big concern. That is probably the biggest concern for this team, and that defense in general does not look good. Marc-Edouard Vlasic is really their only proven top 2 guy. Everyone else really is not even a top 4 guy, is really more of a top 6 kind of guy. So they're playing relatively with 5 top 6 defensemen. Brent Burns may be a little bit higher than that. Maybe he's a top 4 because when he was with the Minnesota Wild, he was playing in their top 4s. So Brent Burns is probably a top 4. And Marc-Edouard Vlasic is a top 2, but everyone else is more of a top 6, which doesn't make for a good blue line at all. You know, even if Mirko Mueller or Taylor Doherty can crack the roster this year, or even Taylor Fedun, you know, they're still not proven. They're not proven. Those guys are all unproven. Then they start out as top 6 guys. Same with Matt Tennyson. He's the 7th defenseman more likely than not. And, you know, when I did my video on the Arizona Coyotes 2 episodes ago, I made a prediction that they were going to be in the playoffs because despite the fact that their forward group looked weak, their defense and goaltending was they were stacked. They were stacked in goal with Mike Smith as the starter. Devin Dubnyk will be an above-average backup, and their defense is one of the best in the league. For the San Jose Sharks, their forward group is ultimately good, but it's all coming from their top 6 and Tommy Wingels. Everyone else in that forward group is just makes that forward group a little bit weaker than it should be. Their bottom 6 is very weak. Their defense looks very ugly. and their goaltending situation is so bad. Not to mention, you got to figure in the drama that they're going to go through this season. You got to expect the possibility that it will bleed into the regular season this year. And when a team goes through drama, performance levels are not good. No one's getting along. No one's playing as a team. And that could be a big problem for the Sharks this year. And I honestly think it will be a problem. So ultimately, I think they can make the playoffs, and they have the talent to do so. But for my prediction, because of the fact that 5 Central Division teams are most likely going back to the playoffs again, and the fact that the Arizona Coyotes are going to be in the playoffs, I'm going to have to say for the Sharks, yes, they'll have a winning record, and yes, they'll be one of the better bubble teams in the league. Maybe even the best bubble team in the league. But I'm going to take a gamble and say no. The San Jose Sharks will not go to the playoffs this year. I think their window of opportunity to win the Stanley Cup has officially closed, or if it hasn't, then this has to be the year for them to be a Cup contender. Logan Couture thinks that they can be a Cup contender this year. He thinks they'll go to the playoffs again, and he thinks that they will be a Cup contender this year. He is making a guarantee for the Sharks this year, which I think is a lot to say. That's a big load to take on for a guy who isn't even wearing a letter yet. So, I think, again, the Sharks have the talent and they can make the playoffs, and I'm not making it a guarantee that they won't make the playoffs. I'm not even making it a guarantee that the Arizona Coyotes will even be in the playoffs. Heck, it's very possible that the Sharks go back to the playoffs this year and the Coyotes miss for the 3rd straight year. That could happen. The Sharks have made the playoffs for 10 straight years, and it could be 11 straight years this season. It would not surprise me at all if that was the case. And even more so, they have the potential to win the Pacific Division this year. But just because of the fact that there are 5 Central Division teams going back to the playoffs, the same 5 as last year, and the fact that I like the Coyotes' defense and their goaltending, and I like Mike Smith better than Antti Niemi, I'm going to say no. I'm taking a gamble here. I'm not guaranteeing it. It's just a gamble, but I'm going to say no to the San Jose Sharks going to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Again, they will have a winning record this year, and they may even be the best non-playoff team in the league this year. But ultimately, I think drama is going to catch up to this team, and I think what I think their season will look like is because of the drama, they're going to dig themselves into a really deep hole at the beginning of the year. I think they'll get off to a really bad start in which they're one of the worst teams in the league. They'll be one of the worst teams in the league in the first half, and then they'll be one of the best teams in the second half. However, because of how bad they were in the first half, that'll be too big of a hole dug for the Sharks to get back into playoff contention. So even though they have the talent, and they have the potential, and they have the offense, their defense is very concerning, and their goaltending situation is not good. They're not that deep in goaltending. And it'll be even worse if one of Antti Niemi or Alex Stalock gets hurt this year. They'll both have to be healthy this year because beyond Alex Stalock, their goaltending depth is not good at all. So their depth in general is not that good at all. I mean, they have the potential to make it better if they move Thornton to the third line and put Pavelski at center on the top line. Then their center depth will definitely compare to that of the Los Angeles Kings, and then maybe they could be a playoff team. But just because of the way the roster looks now, with the players playing the positions that they're going to play to begin the year, or they're projected to play to begin the year, the drama that's following a really hectic offseason, and still not getting over them blowing a 3-0 series lead against the eventual Stanley Cup Championship winning arch rival Los Angeles Kings. I'm going to say that the Sharks are just going to miss the playoffs at the end of the season. I think they're going to dig themselves into a hole too deep to crawl out of. They'll get off to a bad start, then be great in the second half, and then struggle toward the very end. So ultimately, even though they can make the playoffs, I don't think they will make the playoffs. That's, again, a gamble I'm taking. It's not definite. I'm not guaranteeing it. So it won't surprise me if they do go to the playoffs, but just for my prediction, no. The San Jose Sharks are not going to be a playoff team this year. They will miss the playoffs for the first time in 11 years this year. So no, the San Jose Sharks are not a playoff team this year. Again, I think their window of opportunity has closed, and if it hasn't, it will close if they don't win the cup this year, because Doug Wilson even said it himself. They're starting a rebuild this year. This year is the start of a rebuild, and if they don't do well this year, if they don't go to the finals this year, then their whole entire team is going to be retooled. So, no. The San Jose Sharks are not a playoff team this year. And that will do it for episode 161 of Hockey on the Spot. Thank you guys for joining me today. Be sure to tune in again tomorrow when we at long last conclude the Western Conference, the Pacific Division, and conclude the Pacific Division, the Western Conference, and more importantly, the 30 teams in 30 days when we do our final team tomorrow. Tomorrow's final team in the 30 teams in 30 days, and the final California team-based team. Tomorrow, we conclude it all. Tomorrow, we finish up the Pacific Division, the Western Conference, and the 30 teams in 30 days when we talk about the Anaheim Ducks. So, until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Thank you, and have a great day.